Too young to go steady.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name's Hilary Robertson, and for this episode I am delighted to be joined by Gareth Williams. His latest album, Short Stories, has just been released on Miles Music.
But why am I feeling this way?
Gareth is a very well-known and very well-respected jazz pianist and has worked with a lot of big names, including Claire Martin, George Coleman, Dave Liebman, Jim Mullen, Martin Taylor, Tim Garland, Tommy Smith, and many, many others.
Why wait till it may be?
This is not as avant-garde as you might have expected from somebody with Gareth's background, but there are some jazz standards and the beautiful Too Young to Go Steady, which is solo piano and vocal.
Is she made of stone?
This is a lovely album, and it would probably work as an introduction to jazz for a lot of people. Gareth is joined by Martin France on drums and Palle Danielson on double bass, with a few of the tracks using Chris Lawrence on double bass. These are people who've been active in the British jazz scene for many, many years. I'm looking forward to my conversation, and I hope you enjoy listening to it. Right, well, thank you for joining me.
No, thanks for having me.
So, Short Stories is out now. This is a lovely album. It's been a long time coming, I think.
Yes, it's a bit overdue. Well, I mean, that's what people say. Yeah, it's only my third solo album. Need to up the ante a bit, I think. But it is done, and it's out, and I'm pleased.
Yeah. So when did you start writing the tracks for it, or have they been kind of bubbling under for a while?
Some of them were bubbling under for a while, but effective. So I had, before committing to doing the album, I think I had 3 or 4, and then really knuckled down in the last couple of months before the recording, maybe 3 or 4 months before that. I sent some stuff, some charts over to Palle. He doesn't do internet, so you have to send them on parchment by a carrier pigeon. And so yeah, it felt like it was part of a whole project, because even the ones I'd written before, they weren't that long before. Right. And they were written with collating an album in mind. So I say collating as opposed to curating, which is the mode du jour, isn't it? But
absolutely, yeah.
I didn't curate the album. I just wrote some music, and but it was in, I think it was going in one direction. So it wasn't just a collection of ad hoc pieces written over several years.
Right. Okay. And yeah, is it? Was it post-pandemic, or was it recorded? Because some of these things that come out now are,
it was pre-pandemic.
Yeah,
it was. Right. It's definitely a hangover. It was recorded pre-pandemic, and then got sort of lost in the morass of lockdown and all sorts of things. And Peter Watts had to approach me about doing a project before lockdown, and I said, well, I've actually got this one ready recorded. And so he said, well, let's release that. And obviously it's not quite as simple as that. There was quite a lot of mixing needed doing and selection, and during lockdown we had to send stuff by the internet largely, and so sending huge files backwards and forwards, and I live in the country and this internet's pretty dodgy. So we got there in the end.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's an interesting album. I like the fact that, as you say, some of them have got Pallet on bass and some have got Chris on. Were they done deliberately? I mean, I noticed one of them is called For Pallet, isn't it? So that was actually written for him, I guess.
Exactly. Well, Pallet, I mean, we couldn't get Pallet for enough time to do a whole album. And Chris is a great bass player, so we decided to split it that way.
Yeah.
In some ways, he's coming from a similar place to Pallet. He's done a lot of jazz work with Kenny Wheeler, John Taylor. If you like a slightly more European flavour. So he was ideal.
Yeah.
And he's a great reader. He's great in the studio. He's great to work with. So it worked out well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's 2 solo piano pieces, one with voice.
Yeah. That's actually my voice, believe it or not.
I wondered if it was.
Yeah, that's me.
Okay. That's really nice. What made you decide to do that?
Well, funnily enough, Martin France has been on at me to record some singing tracks. They seem to go down well in live gigs. And we did record more singing tracks than that. But that was, in the end, I didn't want it to be an album of this and that. So that's, if you like, that's a sort of a coda to the album. It's not supposed to be, because otherwise, if I did record things like Come Rain or Shine, but shoving that in the middle of the album would have, I think, upset the flow. So it's more like a reflective afterthought.
Yeah. And actually, I think you're right. I think if you'd put 2 or 3 vocals on, everyone would have thought, oh, I didn't know he was a vocalist as well. And then that kind of detracts somewhat from your...
I think so. That would have become the talking point rather than, is the music any good?
Yeah. I agree. So how was your lockdown? You say you live in the country. Were you kind of isolated in a barn somewhere?
Well, that's actually pretty close. Yeah. And we were shielding my daughter, so we didn't go out for 6 months anywhere. Wow. I think I might have gone out once once or twice to the dispensing chemist.
Right.
But pretty much didn't go out for 6 months. Yeah. No, it wasn't great. I can't say it was great. No. I mean, I'm very glad that I was in the country. People, locked in flats in London with several kids must have gone absolutely bananas.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. So now I say we're out of it. We're out of the lockdowns anyway. Are you? So you played with Art Thiemann at Swanage. You're getting out and about now, I guess.
Yeah, I mean it's a slow trickle, and unfortunately, a lot of the regional and smaller jazz clubs have pretty much folded. It was it's a terrible expression, but it was the final nail in the coffin for a lot of these places that rely on volunteer support, often retired people, and a tiny bit of local authority grants, and those all but disappeared. And a lot of jazz audiences, being middle-aged and older, haven't felt confident coming back out after lockdown. So for all sorts of reasons, several, if not many, of the regional clubs have closed. And I think the dilemma in jazz, it sort of brought that forward, because the notion of the aging audience was bound to have an effect at some point.
Yeah.
Because the generation that loved jazz in the 50s and 60s can't go on forever.
No.
And lockdown sort of precipitated that problem, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed at Love Supreme, excuse me, a week or so ago, there were lots and lots of young people, but they were going to the usual places, to the bands that they were familiar with, and I thought, actually, those are not the bands that you hear in regional jazz clubs and things. They're not the bands that people will go, oh yeah, let's pop down to wherever. I mean, I know 2 or 3, as you say, clubs that just can't sustain this anymore. And I think there's a bit of a boost at the moment, because with festivals and things, people are hearing more live music now. But I think you're right. I think in the autumn, when we go back to having to be indoors, some of these smaller clubs are really going to struggle.
Yeah, I mean, some definitely won't reopen.
No.
And some that I have played recently have struggled with numbers. That their faithful have stayed away.
Yeah.
They're still not confident enough to come back. I think it's lots of in the middle-aged bracket and beyond. I think a lot of people have lost their confidence. They've stopped going out. They lived basically at home for probably the best part of a year. Everything's now much more of an effort, and I think confidence has been lost.
Yeah, I agree.
It's no longer just COVID. It's just being slightly older, losing confidence in driving, going out, bumping into young people. Their world is possibly closed in a bit.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, some things have expanded to fill that gap. People are watching more television, and they're becoming, all of a sudden, older people are becoming more used to watching things on catch up and that sort of thing, which they weren't before. If they were out and missed something, they missed it and didn't think of trying to go on iPlayer or 4OD or whatever. And I think that's passing a little bit now, and it does mean that they're going, well, let's just stay in and watch, catch up on something that we've missed or whatever, instead of, as you say, going out, because it suddenly seems a bit more scary to go out. So well, we'll have to see what happens. I think this autumn and winter will be a really telling time, and I think if we have more, because obviously the COVID statistics are going up or have gone up again, and it'll be interesting to see where that takes us, in terms of people having to have more booster jabs and all the rest of it. So, having said all of that, have you got any live gigs lined up for this album specifically?
Not yet, but that's my next task.
Right.
I'm not a great businessman, which doesn't help, but I will organise a tour.
Right, great.
For this, it may be, I don't know how long a tour it can be, for the reasons we've mentioned. But I think I'd like to get a few dates together in close succession in Britain.
Yeah,
I think it's possible. I think I've got enough connections and there's enough interest. So that's the next thing.
Right, very good.
I've had quite a few things going on in general in my life of late, so I'm having to take one step at a time.
Right.
But next step is to get out there, definitely.
Yeah. Good. Well, I'll keep an eye out for that then. Where can people get hold of you, the album, find out about dates and things?
Miles Music is the record label, and that's where the album's available for sale. I'm pretty sure that other platforms will have it, because that's what happens these days. Or I'm on Facebook.
Right.
And I do put gigs, list up gigs on there.
Great. So I'll point people to Facebook, and then they can find out.
Yeah, Facebook and Miles Music.
Great stuff. Fabulous. Well, thank you very much for joining me, Gareth. It's been really good to chat.
Thanks, Hilary.
All right.
Nice to see you.
And you
Bye
too.
now.
Bye. Thanks for listening to my conversation with Gareth Williams. At the start of this podcast, you heard Too Young to Go Steady with the vocals of Gareth alongside his own piano. And then this is now Derivatives, which is featuring the whole trio. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation. And do check out the links in the show notes to find out more about Gareth Williams. Thank you for joining me once more on Harmonious World. Please do rate and review the podcast if you can, and share it with your friends. Meanwhile, I hope that you continue to share what you're good at to make this world a little more harmonious. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.